happy that everyone was able to come tonight. And I think a lot of people had originally RSVP'd for our original date, which was the 26th of June, and we rescheduled due to the Democratic debates because we didn't want to have a conflict there. But so happy that everybody came tonight, and I want to welcome in particular a couple of our city council members, Megan Harmon and Kristen Sneeden. Thank you for being, and then of course Jason, who's on our panel. And Michelle Sevilla is here from Monique Limon's office. I think there may be somebody from the mayor's office as well, Kathy Morales. Okay, great. And is that Sandy? Okay, great. Sandy Kiev me. Okay, great. Well, welcome. Thank you for being here. And this will be videotaped, so at the end of the panel, when we have the question, please wait and have a mic if you're going to ask a question or make a comment so we can actually get your audio. I'd also like to recognize that Laura Bodie, who is the executive director of the Santa Barbara Rental Property Association, is here, and so she's available she's over there. So when we get to the question section, she knows all about all the new codes if people are interested in that as well, and the rental from the Rental Owners Association. So she's very knowledgeable there. So last year, the Academy's Global Citizens Club did a number of panels that were focused on the Santa Barbara retail situation and the downtown corridor, and just the crisis, the apocalypse, however you want to express it. And one of the big things that kept coming up was the need for more people, more bodies, more housing in the central business district. And so from those conversations where we brought our community together, we brought in some outside ideas by having Jerry Ogburn, who had led the Palm Springs redevelopment projects. I think the city is still getting involved with trying to really address that issue, and it's a systemic issue. So it's not just the retail, but it's also housing, and part of what we'll talk about, I think our panelists will talk about tonight. But with that in mind, we wanted to let people know about a couple of events that are coming up in the near future that are, first of all, on July 17th, there's a special meeting on the changes to the multi-unit housing program that's being hosted by the city, and it will be held at the Faulkner Gallery, and that's on July 17th, starting from 6 to 7 p.m. And you can reach out to Jessica Metzger at Santa Barbara, California. She's in the county, and you can also send us an email if you want to get in touch. City of Santa Barbara. Yes, sorry, City of Santa Barbara. And also, I don't have many details yet, but there is going to be a special council meeting on July 25th at 4 p.m. at Council Chambers. At that time, the city consultant, Cosmont, will present their findings and some recommendations for downtown. And that's the consultant that they hired after we had started that conversation about downtown revitalization, and this consultant is hired by the city to come up with recommendations to really address that problem. So with that, I wanted to bring Ronaldo Brudico, our wonderful moderator, up, president of the Academy. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
So, Lucretia Upstart, we haven't met yet, so I just want to say hello. Thank you. My pleasure. So I just want to also acknowledge Burhan back here in the back is the food and beverage manager, which provided those lovely hors d'oeuvres for us tonight, so let's give him a hand. And our host, Colleen, who is the manager now of the El Encanto, was here earlier tonight and wishes you all well, but she had to leave because she had another appointment, but said to make sure to mention that she was here and is really delighted we're doing these meetings, which I'm delighted we're doing as well. So it's great to have the El Encanto as, for us, because we live right across the street, we consider this the cafeteria. But you can consider it, I guess, something more like our playpen. The idea is to have these conversations. What are these conversations about? Well, what they're about is to try and get a conversation started. And what we found is one issue after another comes up in the civic. It's in the polis, as the Greek would say. So the Greeks believed that if people who lived in Athens cared enough to sit down and talk about and think about the issues that affected Athens, they would actually end up solving the problems. And for hundreds of years, they were right. But it required citizen activism, citizen involvement. And what this is about is to try and bring that citizen involvement to the conversations. So tonight is not the hoped-for outcome where you'll hear all kinds of brilliant ideas. This is the way to get the conversation started with all the appropriate levels of city council members, of the people who have a vested economic interest, which are the people who own the real estate, people who live here, people who work here, the companies like Amazon that are coming here and don't have any idea what they're about to run into in terms of the shortage of housing. Okay, there are 80 people, Rob was confirming to me earlier tonight, 80 people are on the streets of Santa Barbara right now with vouchers for Section 8 housing and no Section 8 housing. 80. That's a big number of people wandering around who are trying to land. And we're their brothers and sisters. So this conversation is not just about what happens to the poorest of the poor, in fact, Section 8, or the people challenged because of medical or military service. This is about real normal people. What do we do about affordable housing, not just homelessness? We've done stuff on homelessness. This is about affordable housing. And so we wanted to start off tonight with Jason Dominguez. Now, Jason, as you can read in your brochure, and I don't think it's useful to reread what's in the brochure, you got it. But Jason is the official liaison to each of the touch points, if you can read this, that come up in this conversation. So he's the city council member who's designated the liaison with all these different aspects of the community that are trying to struggle with the affordable housing issue. So we wanted to lead off with Jason. We were going to go through each of the panelists, those who've been here before, and at the end, we'll have a brief announcement, and then we'll go straight into Q&A. And did we bring the cards tonight, Christy?
Yeah, we are in. Most people have a card so they can write.
Okay. So here's the thing. If, on that question card, we won't get to all of them, but if you write a question and you give us your email address, there's two ways you can get the answer. One, we'll post the answer on our website if we can't get to your question tonight. In the alternative, if you want, you can contact us or we'll contact you with your email address. And that way we can deal with the questions we can't deal with tonight. With that said, let me go to our first speaker and our panelist, Jason. Thank you.
So I'm not very prepared because when I read the email, I read it in a hurry and I thought you were inviting me to be part of the Democrats' debate. I thought I would be number 28.
That's Tom Steyer.
It's Tom Steyer. So first, let me start. The purpose of my talking points today are to do nothing more than reset your expectations on housing. The title here is Housing Solutions. Take out your pen, cross out solutions, and insert a word: management, mitigation, deal with it, whatever you want to do, but we're not going to solve housing. It's like homelessness. We don't solve homelessness. We try to manage it and mitigate it as much as possible. And there's credentials in here. One of the things that's not mentioned is I started with a group of friends with We're Street Reach. Any of you know Deb Barnes, who's been a lifelong advocate in Santa Barbara. We started a home where we said, let's try to do a pilot, a small home project, and see how we can help with seniors, how we can help them solve their homelessness. And we went for a while, and it took a lot of work, a lot of administrative time, and at the end, it kind of died because of one tenant and a Section 8 voucher that went awry. And so we realized how hard it was, that we were hoping to have a model that we could roll out around the South Coast, but it is a difficult thing. So aside from having worked for two legal aid corporations that have worked in housing law, I actually have direct experience trying to solve the problem, along with having been a renter in Santa Barbara. I'm still a renter now. And one of the consequences of Santa Barbara having so many renters, we're right around 65%, is we're sending a lot of money outside of our community. So that impacts our retail stores, our restaurants, salaries. Just as an example, I live in a duplex, and my wife and I pay $2,500 a month, and our neighbor pays $3,000. So that's $5,500 a month that goes to Palo Alto. So that's about $60,000 plus a year that is spent outside of our economy. So multiply that times however many units. We have some 40,000 units in Santa Barbara. 65% of those are rentals. So I'm not sure what percentage of those are owned by out-of-town entities, but it's probably pretty high. So we're losing a lot of local GDP that could be spent here. So Really, the way I see this problem is it's a national economic problem. This is a symptom of a decades-long national economic problem, where we have concentration of wealth getting tighter and tighter amongst the 1%. Middle class are getting squeezed out, and the workforce, the working poor, are getting lower and lower wages with higher and higher expenses. And the solution to that, and I'm glad that Ronaldo brought this up, is citizens getting engaged, because right now the big problem is money in politics. Campaign finance reform is absolutely crucial. So I'm not going to get into all that, but that's why there are so many policies that lead to corporate welfare where corporations aren't paying taxes. So I don't want to get too far afield into that, but let me come back into housing. But those are really where we need to focus our efforts. Supply and demand. So anytime we do something as government, we influence the supply and demand curves, and it's as true for housing as anything else. When you talk about housing, you better be very careful to talk about what category of housing you're talking about. Luxury apartments are very different from duplexes, which are very different from single-family homes. So when the council passed AUD several years ago, it incentivized apartments, but at the cost to home ownership opportunities. Townhomes and condos have all but disappeared in terms of their production. And the key to the American dream is owning your home. If you play your cards right, you have a mortgage. Your mortgage is paid off right around the time when you're retiring, so your housing costs drop at the same time that your revenue from your job drops to match maybe your pension decline if you have a pension. If you rent in Santa Barbara, which 65% of our people do, their rents keep going up, even if they retire and they have no income, a slight pension, a good pension. So this is a structural defect in the system, and that's something we need to fix. So one thing I've really been pushing, unfortunately unsuccessfully, is increasing our home ownership opportunities in Santa Barbara. My number one wish would be that renters who live here now can be converted magically into homeowners. I don't want to get rid of our renters and bring in different homeowners. I really want to see Santa Barbarans who've lived here, maybe multiple generations, convert from renters to homeowners. And that's going to take a lot of capital and a lot of effort. What we do as government is we pick new winners and new losers if we don't figure out a way to create capital and create income. And so we have to be careful that we do no harm. And unfortunately, our AUD did do harm because there were dozens of old units that were being rented below market rates that were demolished to make way for relatively expensive apartments. So lots of families were dislocated. I was just curious. I have a re-election campaign in November, so I'm looking at my voter numbers. And I pulled the data, and it showed there's 1,500 voters in my district. And when I ran, there were 2,000 voters. So that was 3.5 years ago. That means 25% of the voter pool in my district have disappeared. And we're still trying to get a good grip on what the number is of people from Santa Barbara who've been dislocated. But to me, to see that shocking reduction in the number of voters is very scary. And my district is one of the workforce districts. It's the east side, the Milpas corridor. So one of the ways to deal with the housing problem is to help raise incomes, because if the rents are going to be up here, and that's generally determined by regional or statewide incomes, what we have to try to do is raise the incomes of our graduating high school students, graduating college students. How do we get them to make more money so they can compete with out-of-towners, right? Because out-of-towners are going to drive the income in Santa Barbara. There's 8 billion people on the planet who would love to live in Santa Barbara. That's where our incomes, that's where the rents are being driven by, is the demand from out of town. It's not necessarily the people who want to come here to SBCC or who stay after going to UCSB, but it's really anyone. It's retired lawyers from St. Louis who move here. It's retired doctors to move here, dot-commers who have a lot of income. So what we need to do is really raise the incomes of our locals so that they can afford to be here. So those are really my comments. I'll look forward to your questions and answers. I want to thank you all for being here. You're the engaged people. I wish there were more people who are having the housing issues who were engaged. I'm afraid that the debate at the national level has turned people off from politics. The polarized people in politics are also responsible. All the people on one end who are driving people nuts, the people on the other end are really driving out the masses in the middle where we could really get the solutions to these problems. So thank you.
So when you've got those cards there, so now you can ask, you can write down a question. So tell me, Jason, how do we get the homes that people can own? It's a great question. I'm not sure if he has an answer, and I'm not sure any of us have that answer, but I like the question because the idea of converting from rental stock to homeownership is an intriguing question in a place where infill has been the considered doctrine. Like we're land short and people long. And so I think Jason's made a couple of interesting points. Feel free to ask him about how that can be executed. Okay, the next panelist today, and I just got to meet her tonight, as you see, when we were looking around for somebody who was really knowledgeable, really committed to the solution, we asked some very good people. We asked John Campanella, we asked Hal Conklin, we asked a few other people, and what they said is, oh, you got to get Lucretia in here. She's the one who would understand what might be possible, because what she does is statistical analysis to support, hopefully, innovative solutions. So I'm going to introduce you now. Please take the floor.
Hi, everyone. I'm probably going to go through these slides a little bit quicker just for time, but first I wanted to introduce myself. So my background's in architecture with a focus on equity, socio-equity, and that means there's a nexus between the environment, the built environment, so sustainability, and current political climate in certain areas. So in my past position, I've flown across the country where we take vacant and abandoned properties and we bring them to code for Section 8 HUD and affordable housing sector. Prior to that, I worked in transitional homes and shelters, bring them to code to help people be more efficient in their shelter and transitional programs. Understanding that architecture and design is about dignity. So when we talk about housing crisis, I want us to really think that housing is an opportunity for intervention. It's not a housing crisis specifically to focus on, but a solution and how we can make a plausible step to make that happen. So I think it's important to start talking more about the influence behind a housing crisis. As already previously stated, the housing crisis is a national problem, and it goes into a lot more complex than what probably we'll review tonight. But it ranges all the way from cyclical socioeconomic gaps, as Jason touched on, to understanding that housing is a culturally impactive, reflective ideology. So if we have housing, it goes back from 1920 to National Housing Administration to the roots of Santa Barbara specific. And with that said, it's important that we really understand that we have to debunk stigma through just data. And through data, we can be above biases. These statistics were taken today. They're from a software program that I helped create with AMA Construct, so specific to Santa Barbara Spit City. So as you can see, average monthly rental is right around 3 to 4 bedroom and is about $5,000 per month. And if you would like, after this, if you want to be able to have more of these statistics, I'd be happy to send it to you. But for time, we're going to focus on that number. And on that number, if 30% of your monthly income should be towards your living environment, $5,000 per month isn't plausible or relevant to what people make on average here in the city. So let's start with homelessness. So I have a nonprofit that serves our homeless community in Santa Barbara and work along Jeff Schaefer. In January, we did a point-in-time count. So where we walked out in Santa Barbara, the city of Santa Barbara as well as the county. But this number right here, this is for the city. We have 887 homeless individuals on any given night in the city of Santa Barbara alone. A lot of people would like to approach homelessness as it's never truly solved. It has been solved in many areas by having a housing-first approach. Having a housing-first approach helps programs be more successful and making their programs more efficient and having longevity and being rehabilitating the member back into society. Next, I want to address public housing. And I was toying with the idea to steer away from the stigma of using Section 8. But Section 8 is often neighbors that you live right next to and have no idea. So a voucher is so that they spend 30% of their income for their housing. And as you can see, if it's $5,000 a month, if you're a family of 3 to 4 people and you need that bedrooms, you're not typically going to be only spending 30%. On average for the city of Santa Barbara, it's 70% of your income goes to your monthly rent. And so these statistics are from HUD, so urban development. And this goes for Santa Barbara County, not Santa Barbara specific. So that means Santa Maria, Lompoc, which have quite a different socioeconomic climate versus the city of Santa Barbara. As you can see, if you are a family of 4 and make $80,000 in the county of Santa Barbara, and that's the county, then you're living below the poverty line. If you're in the city, was not on here specific, that's $104,000 annually. So affordable housing, there is often a response from the community when we say we're building affordable housing. Oftentimes people have an idea that it's going to impact the value of their home or it's going to impact the climate of their community health. But in actuality, affordable housing is 60 to 80% AMI. That means people who make around $45,000 to $65,000 plus. AMI, by the way, stands for area median income. And the only thing they can afford is obviously around $2,000 per month or less. Next is workforce housing. That's 80% to 120% AMI, area median income. And what I want to expand on the next slide is RHNA. So RHNA is an acronym that starts for Regional Housing Need or Assistance. We need almost 2,000 units built by 2023, or we'll be losing the money that supports our veterans and our homeless community. But we need to be smart about it. That doesn't mean that we have very quick solutions. We need to integrate and be intentional to avoid segregated housing developments. So when we approach something, it can't be a short-term solution. Tiny homes, if it's a long-term solution, would be relevant, but if it's a quick solution, that's not going to solve it. It's just going to be the same repeated cycle that we've been seeing since segregations from the beginning. That means we need to do architectural design for socio-equity. So this is I'll go over this briefly. There's been a movement in designing things more sustainable, being socially conscious of our environment. The same program that started LEAD will be starting SEED, and that was a movement by Chicago. And SEED is an acronym for Socioeconomic and Environmental Design. So that means taking the environmental factors of sustainability, but then making that relevant to socio-design. And that is how you make something more long-term. In a nutshell, if you're making something prefabricated and quick, and you're value engineering an affordable unit, you want to make sure that it's going to stand, so in 10 years you don't have to rehabilitate it, and make sure that it's safe, and that people are going to move forward with their lives to the next step, and ultimately become homeowners. I want the conversation to really start in thinking of how this affects me. I hear the term NIMBY when I moved to Santa Barbara a lot, and I didn't know what it meant. It's not in my backyard. The actuality is there's no such thing as NIMBY. So it's in your backyard right now. So how can you make this a solution for that? So areas of opportunity really need to focus on the missing middle. The missing middle mean the middle class. So people who are millennials, seniors, or making an average income that's between the middle class, which again ranges from 45, and if you're doing workforce, over $85,000 to $104,000 annually, need to be able to live here so that they can help Santa Barbara thrive in its diversity, help businesses long term. Mixed use. Mixed use seems new to Santa Barbara when we're talking about CBD. CBD is an acronym for Central Business District. This is downtown State Street. This isn't a new concept. This has been happening since the Industrial Revolution, where you work and you live in so close proximities. A lot of the neighborhoods that were built in Europe with that ideology in mind are thriving. They have density housing in some places, and they have common areas. State Street is a prime example where we have vacants that can be turned into mixed-use properties with the right policy application and allow that to be successful. A few policies to keep in mind would be doing a 10% as a bonus density. Coming from a company where we took vacant and abandoned properties, we had to work with both the public and the private sector to make it viable through a concept of return of cost. So if you are constructing something, you have to consider how much you're going to make, how long it's going to take, and how long you're going to have your investment back. So if your intent is to have 5% or more on the return of cash of your investment, then having 10% as your bonus density rather than 10% taking away from your market rate is invaluable. Eliminating the cost of land. This is common on the East Coast, where if you were working to build on, say, a parking lot, then you are not charged for the cost of land if you are working for affordable or workforce housing specific. Also, decreasing parking spaces where they are no longer needed or viable. Senior housing often doesn't need parking spaces and can decrease that to increase units and then have something available. Senior housing right now has a wait list of 8 years to an affordable unit. And proximity to public transportation should be another consideration. In many counties, they allow them to consider how far it would be and what the walk score of the area is before they mandate how many parking spots are for that development. And I want you to know that I believe there are solutions. I would encourage you to know that many solutions have happened by people believing in themselves to move forward and make that happen through coalitions and grassroots movements. Grassroots movements are here happening in Santa Barbara, whether you help Habitat for Humanity, Housing for People, Self-House Housing, Housing Authority. Get involved, be educated, and know that your voice matters. And I wanted to end with one of my favorite quotes from Jane Jacobs. The pseudoscience of planning seems almost neurotic in its determination to imitate empirical failure and ignore empirical successes. So we're going to open up for question and answers at the end, and I would hope that as we come forward and we talk, that we bring up solutions and successes as our main focus. Thank you.
We have a panel, by the way, it's on videotape if you want to see it, on transportation. And we were talking at that time about the tragedy of 101, how people come here, 37,000 people a day on 101, jammed bumper to bumper, coming and going. And we pointed out in that panel that the challenge was the last mile, meaning even if you could get to the train station, how do you get from the train station to your place of work? What she just brought up, Grisha was bringing up, is the issue associated with transit. And that's called in this world the circulation element. And clearly there's some symbiosis that we have to develop here as we go towards a solution between the transportation element, and which would reduce parking spaces and other things, but which also would give us the ability to bring more infill to things that already exist, but where we're holding them for parking spaces we may or may not need, or where we could add additional parking spaces without reducing and maybe even adding to the housing sources. So with that in mind, I'm going to go now to Matt Turner. Now, Matt I've known for a number of years, at least maybe 8 or 9 now, and Matt is, his brother sat right here in the front row. Hey, Sat, good to see you. Matt Turner is on this panel because he was really inspirational to a lot of young millennials for the last 6-7 years, trying to bring a millennial voice to some of the policy deliberations for Santa Barbara. And we felt there was 2 reasons why we had to include the millennial voice tonight. One is the obvious. That's the next generation. And if we haven't figured out what we're going to do for the next generation or what the next generation needs and wants, we have not solved the problem. We've kicked the can down the road. So that's one reason why Matt's here. The other reason Matt's here is because when you look at the questions about millennials and you start to factor in that Amazon is coming to town with people that make more than $100,000 a year, and they don't have housing either. And that's going to be on our doorstep relatively soon because that's where they're going, the Saks building. Now, if that's happening and we don't take into effect that it's happening, what do we do with all the millennials we already have, that per the thing that Lucretia just said, I mean, can't afford the housing we got? And even what do we do with the people who come to town who can afford the housing, like Amazon employees? It's not all, but many of them. So with that in mind, we said, Matt, would you come to us tonight and give us some thoughts? What does it look like from a millennial lens, what we're dealing with the housing in Santa Barbara? Matt?
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. Appreciate you, Ronaldo. Thanks, Christy, for inviting me to be part of the panel tonight. So my approach tonight is really going to be focused on action. I've been in this community for about 7 years, and I've had my own challenges with housing, which I'll get into here, but my focus has really been around organizing people to create change. And I think that's really what this issue is about, and I think it actually can be a catalyst to creating a lot of other change around it. I see it. I've been involved in a lot of conversations around community development, especially around State Street's development and what's going on State Street with businesses out of commission and vacancies and homelessness and a lot of different issues. And in those conversations, it's become apparent to me that this issue, creating millennial-focused housing on State Street and right around State Street, could be a catalyst to creating a lot of those changes that the city's looking for. So I'm going to focus on that tonight very, very clearly. These are the three things I'm going to cover: why I care about this issue specifically. Number two, why this issue actually makes sense and could be a catalyst. And number three, what action steps we can take leaving tonight to start to move this forward. First, why I care. When I moved here about 7 years ago, I was one of these people that came here and didn't have a place to live. And I put a picture of Butterfly Beach up because I basically lived at Butterfly Beach for about 2 years. Whether that was in my car, sleeping a block away, or I'd find housing for a month and that would fall through, or I'd find a place to stay, or my girlfriend and I would live together, or I'd live with my brother, and that wouldn't be consistent enough. And so Butterfly Beach basically was my home for about 2 years. I really love this place. I wanted to put a photo of it up there. But I really relate to this issue because I've gone through it, and I think that's something that keeps us from making change sometimes, is we don't include people that are going through the issue and creating the solution. So out of all the things I work on in this community, this issue kind of tugs at my heartstrings a little bit more, and I really empathize with people that are going through the situation because of that. Hustlers, this is a group that I started with my brother in 2014. And what this group is about, and I was living in my car at the time when I started this group because I didn't want to wait until my housing was taken care of to figure out how I could serve the community. So we created this team called the Hustlers for Humanity, which teams people up to serve the community together. And over the course of the last 5 years, we've worked with probably about 100 nonprofits in Santa Barbara. And we are a team-based approach to volunteerism. We take on big issues. We work at fundraisers. That's how I got to know Christy and I got to know Ronaldo, as we started setting up chairs at Ronaldo's events, his monthly mixers, and that's what we did. We just got involved, and we have about 500 people in the group, and it's growing very quickly. And here's a little bit about the service we do. We work in all sectors of the community. We do beach cleanups, we work with homelessness, we work with human trafficking survivors, we work with climate change issues. It doesn't really matter. Whatever the people need, whatever people want that join our team, we get involved. And now we're expanding that group to other cities. San Diego, we launched a chapter there this year, and we'll be launching a chapter in Boston next year. And secondarily, that's led to another platform called Serve Community, which is around uniting communities around service. So the reason I bring that up is I really care about this issue, and I work in a lot of communities around the country. And I see a lot of the same challenges, but I also recognize solutions that are happening that we could bring here. And one of those is really bring millennials into the center of the city as a catalyst that really does make a difference. San Diego is a place that I've been spending a lot of time as we started this new chapter, and Little Italy is a place that I've been hanging out in, and I'm actually looking for a second place down there because of this group is taking off and I need to be there more. And the reason I put that up here is this is a really great example of a neighborhood within San Diego that is really taking off. And the reason for that is they've built a lot of younger focused housing right on the downtown sector, within a block or two of the main drag, and all these booming businesses are going up, and the energy is incredible just to hang out there. And you see people hanging out morning, afternoon, night, and it's incredible. And so here are some of the benefits that I put up there and why people are drawn there. It's packed with energy, it has all these developments, has lots of things to do for people. There's collisions, you bump into people, it's walking distance, there's scooters, there's bikes, there's ways to get around. So when younger people specifically move to a new community, they're not looking to live off in the suburb and have a home to themselves. They really are looking to soak up the best of what that community has. And Santa Barbara has a really great, rich community. It's a draw for people because of the weather, because of the climate, because of the people here, because of the opportunities. And I see us missing an opportunity because we don't have any housing on State Street. And what that does is it leaves a void energetically, which gets filled by the homeless community because there's nobody else there. So the truth is we already have housing on State Street. We just don't have homes on State Street. People are already living there. So why does this make sense? Like I said, right now we have homelessness and we have vacancies, but we could easily see that as an opportunity to shift into housing and bustling businesses. There's a growing millennial population, as Ronaldo alluded to. We have Amazon is moving to town. Sonos is on State Street already and is doing incredible. Procore is expanding and new people are moving to town. I bumped into an employee of Alexa, of Amazon now has Alexa here as their headquarters for Alexa, and this guy's one of their new employees. He got just hired out of college a year ago, and he said there's about 120 young employees that are already here, and he said in the next 6 months there's going to be 300 employees here. And so I told him a little bit about this issue, and he's living up in the Riviera somewhere, renting a cottage on someone's property. And I mentioned this issue. I said, would you be interested in living downtown if there was housing? He's like, of course I would. And I told him we're looking to put together an event specifically around this issue, around millennials and housing. And I said, would you and any of your employees and your coworkers want to come to that? He said, every single one of my employees my coworkers would show up at that event. You let me know when it's going to be, and we'll have 300 people there. That's what he said to me. Because as Ronaldo alluded to, these are people that actually have salaries, but they're still struggling to find housing. And where do they want to live? They want to live downtown so they can walk, they can see each other, and they can enjoy the nightlife. And here's a quote that I pulled here that I think really sums this up. Each great movement of population in some presents a new opportunity and a new task, and wisdom consists in taking advantage of the movement while it's still fluid. And we're in the middle of that movement right now, and that's why I was saying this is a real opportunity for innovation that we're in. So we didn't miss out, and this challenge is actually something good if we take advantage of it. So what do millennials want specifically? And I touched on this a little bit. We want to change the world and be involved in the community. We want to meet each other. We want to collide with each other. We want to be hanging out at coffee shops and at restaurants and bars. We want to enjoy the best of the city life that Santa Barbara has to offer, or whatever city that happens to be. And let's see, in millennial housing needs. We'll get into a little bit about what millennials really want in their housing. It's not a lot of space. We're willing to forego parking. We're willing to forego a lot of the things that previous generations needed in their housing. It's not really about the life within the four walls that we live in. It's really about the community outside of those walls. We'd rather live in a smaller unit because we're not going to spend as much time in anyway. We'd rather live near our peers or with our peers, maybe sharing common spaces. We don't need a car necessarily. We're willing to forego that as long as we can get around effectively. So these are just some of the things that we want, and I think this is something that's missing from some of the conversations I've been in, and this is something John Campanella on the Planning Commission has really done a great job of, is trying to pull younger people into the conversation. Because there are a lot of conversations happening in the community around this issue, but oftentimes younger people are left completely out of those conversations, and it's really time to bring them into the forefront of those conversations so they can be part of creating those solutions. And how the city wins. I studied a report for this presentation, and I'll give the reference to it at the end. But this is a great quote from a planning developer, an economic planning developer in Phoenix, about the benefits that they noticed. When they turned their focus towards creating millennial housing in Phoenix, they noticed an unbelievable boom of activity, but all these side benefits that they didn't necessarily see happening. And I listed a few of them here. They're more connected to the community. They tend to be on more boards and commissions. They get involved in the city governance, actually, if they can be downtown and feel a part of it. They like to be part of creating the solutions, whether that's the downtown strategic plan. They go to city council meetings and planning meetings. They like to be involved in shaping the city and the structure, and it's actually benefiting Phoenix for years to come. And I think that's something that we could really bring to this community as a side additional benefit to figuring this issue out. Number 3, action steps, and we'll close here. I'm a big football, big sports fan, obviously, so I had a little shout out to my New England Patriots right here. But there's a phrase in football that I think is really appropriate, and it's something we bring into the Hustlers, which is a team-based approach to community, which is moving the chains. And what that means is, for those of you that don't know football, is there's this thing called the first down chains. So the point of football is to score touchdowns, but you don't try to score a touchdown on every play. You actually focus on getting what's called a first down, and you move the chains forward bit by bit until you score. And this is something that I think is missing a lot of times in community change, is people get so overwhelmed with the big picture and the long vision and feeling overwhelmed by how to figure that out, that we forget that it's really about making incremental change and moving things forward. And social change is the team game, just like sports. And this is what I see as being a recipe for creating projects that work, is we need property owners, and starting with one, we need the right developer, we need the right plan for that property, and we need support from the city. And if we had that, we could create one-by-one successes that would actually move this forward. So we don't need to create 10 or 20 properties right off the bat, but we do need to create one. So I'm hoping there are some people in this room, or that we can, leaving this event, we can start to pull a team together of people in different positions that can start to create successes. Because even if we created one success, one millennial-focused property that hit a home run on this, that would lead to more, because there would be less fear from the other developers and property owners that this wouldn't work. But we do need people to step up and be part of the solution and start to create successes one by one. And there are two types of people. There are people that say, but this, so no, but this won't work, so no, or yes, and maybe I have a concern, maybe there's a challenge. And what we're looking for is these people. You can be either one of these people, doesn't really matter to me, but we need yes and people, because these are the people that actually create change. And now what? Leaving this event, we're going to be doing a follow-up event to this, which we haven't created the date for, but it's specifically going to be focused on millennial housing solutions. It's going to be hosted at the Youth Interactive. We're going to be doing it over the next month or two. I will get that date to this whole community through Christy. We've already talked about this. But if you'd like to be part of that, I would love for you to come out and give us your feedback and be part of it, because it's really about, like I said, moving the change forward one event at a time and one project at a time. So I thank you for coming out tonight. I appreciate you guys showing up and being part of it. This is moving the change forward. So you guys participated in the first down tonight. I'd like to get this to the end zone. Great, thank you guys.
Okay. So now you know why we invited Matt. And I got to tell you, I had personal testimonial. When he first started Hustlers 7-8 years ago, I said, Matt, I love what you're doing. Can you give me a different name? Us boomers, the idea of hustler. He goes, no, I can't do it. That's what it is. And then when my son joined the group, our millennial son joined the group, he goes, Dad, this hustlers group is great. I'm going, oh, apparently no negative for him. So congratulations, Matt and Sat, for doing that. And that you're 500 strong is fabulous. Really grateful for all you do for this town. Okay, our final panelist tonight, Rob Fredericks. So many of you probably don't know that we even have, maybe you do know, but we have a housing authority here in the city of Santa Barbara. You probably don't run across it much because a whole lot of their work deals with Section 8 housing. But the mandate's a little broader than that, and therefore the challenges are broader. So we thought it'd be good to bring Rob up to just kind of reflect back on what he's doing and any observations he has on what we've already heard tonight, and then we'll take a brief announcement break while you write on your questions on your cards, and then we'll resume with Q&A. So, Rob, thanks for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you coming.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm from the government, and I'm here to help. So, slide housing in Santa Barbara. I don't have housing in Santa Barbara is great or bad. It's just housing in Santa Barbara. We have challenges here. And one thing that I've been with the Housing Authority for 24 years, and one thing that's kept me there is our mission of putting residents first and real estate second. We care about the people in our community and the people we serve. And joining the residents with housing is so important. And the importance of home is, it really is the center of our life. It's our own individual refuge where we can go and be ourselves and live and thrive. And unfortunately, many people don't have homes here in our community. It was mentioned earlier, we have 887 homeless in Santa Barbara, and that's the result of not providing enough housing. When you don't provide enough housing, you tear the fabric of your community apart, and you tear the fabric of your families apart when you don't have adequate housing. And in fact, I just read an article this morning, and some of you may have read, San Francisco had an increase of 30% homeless from their point-in-time count this year to last year. So it's a huge issue, and I wanted to frame it. It's already been mentioned, but we've had talks about it's not just Santa Barbara, it's a national problem. And just 2 weeks ago, Harvard's Joint Center for Housing released their annual report, their annual doom and gloom report on housing. And I just want to go over a few brief slides here. And this one here just shows that home buying is out of reach for many people, and it's particularly acute on the West Coast area where the price to income ratio is just way out of whack. It's over 6 times what you earn annually, what it costs to buy a home here. In fact, it's much more on the South Coast here in Santa Barbara. And the low rent stock across the nation has shrunk since 2011. We're losing our available affordable housing stock. Jason mentioned that. There was just a development in front of the Planning Commission a couple of weeks ago, and the approval, one of the unintended consequences is we're losing some affordable housing units to build some new AUD units. So it's an issue that we recognize and we have to grapple with. And rent cost burdens are increasing all across the nation. People are spending much more than 30% of their income for rent. They're giving up basic necessities like health insurance and food and clothing just to keep a roof over their head, and many of them aren't keeping a roof over their head. Land prices, another driver of development or lack thereof, is land prices, and land prices have increased since 2012. On the West Coast in Santa Barbara County, over 50% since 2012, land prices. Some of that's a result of the AUD policy, which actually it helps spur some new development, which is needed, but it increased land prices, and it locked us as a housing authority out of developing much needed housing. And just real quick, a quick commercial on the Housing Authority. We're a separate government agency from the city of Santa Barbara. We're a standalone agency. Our tie to the city is that they formed us back in 1969. We're celebrating our 50th anniversary of providing affordable housing in the community. The city council does appoint our board of commissioners, my bosses, and they help set our policy moving forward. And I'm really proud of what we have done over the last 50 years, and I'll go over that in a moment. Again, rental stock has declined, and you can see the hot spots where it's declined most on the West Coast. And we're expected to lose another 1.2 million homes, rental affordable units by 2029, and that's deed-restricted units that are funded by the federal government that are set to go to market by 2029 if they're not preserved. So that's an issue. And in California, there's a housing deficit of affordable homes of 1.5 million units, and a total deficit of about 3 million units that we need to build. And yet we've only been, over the last 10 years, if you look at an average, we've been producing about 40,000 units a year. So you take the 40,000 into 1.5 million homes, it would take us about 37 years at this rate just to get up to even, and we need more housing now, not 37 years from now. In Santa Barbara, in the first quarter of this year, January through April, the median home price in Santa Barbara, $1.3 million, and yet our area median income is only $79,300. So we have one of the lowest affordability indexes in the country. And average rental of a 2-bedroom, this is even a little bit low, $2,500. A little bit old statistic there, but considering you're not going to pay more than if you say I'm going to have an affordable rent, not paying more than 30% of my income for rent, to afford that $2,500 unit, you really need to be earning $100,000 a year. There's a lot of people that don't earn $100,000 a year, and those folks that qualify for Section 8 for rental assistance, that's 80% AMI and below. That's for a single person, that's $61,850 a year. There's a whole lot of people, millennials and otherwise, that work along State Street that don't earn even the $61,000 a year that would qualify for Section 8 housing assistance. Unfortunately, there's just not enough funding appropriated through Congress for that type of assistance. So that $100,000 translates to $8,300 a month. And what do you get? The consequences, right? You get commuters coming in and out of Santa Barbara every day from North County, South County. That's a picture of me because I'm one of those commuters that drive in from Ventura every day. So it's not good for the environment, and I'm one of those. I do drive an electric car and have solar panels, but it still is bad. It's bad. Real quick, we've as a housing authority, we've done a really admirable job of providing affordable housing in this community over the last 50 years. We have built over 1,250 units spread across 60 developments throughout the city. And we're really proud of what we've built and the character and the creating communities for people that they're proud to live in. And that's what we want to continue to do. But we know we have to do it differently. We can't continue to do what we've been doing. If you do what you always did, you're going to get what you always got. And things are changing, and we're not providing the housing that's needed for the millennials and elsewhere. So we have to change what we're doing. This is our mission, and I wanted to let you know, we've just recently changed our mission statement. And you'll see in there, nowhere does it say low income. It just says affordable housing. That's because our commission recognized in our staff that we need to help the missing middle as well achieve affordable housing for them. So we changed our mission and we've expanded what we're doing. And that's just real quick, our housing stock. And it's not as much as people report in the paper. You'll hear people say, oh, the housing authority, they have 20% of the rental housing stock. No, we don't. We have 5.7%. We need more in this community. The RENA numbers, why we need more, the regional housing needs allocation. You can see here the moderate income, the missing middle, we're not producing nearly enough. We're not producing enough in any of these categories. We need more housing, and it is a supply and demand issue. And if you're not creating enough supply and that demand's there, you're going to have that upward pressure on rents and those negative consequences that we talked about. So what we did in 2017, the commission expanded our mission to say we can serve households up to 160% area median income. And so we did that. We changed our policy, and we're allowed to do that as a housing authority. You may say, well, you're a housing authority. How can you serve not low income? Well, under the Health and Safety Code, that's the housing authority law that we're formed under, is only 20% of our housing stock is required to be affordable. The rest, 80%, can be luxury apartments if we so desired. But if I did that, we would be going rogue, right? If we did 80%, and I think Jason would have a problem with that, as well as the rest of the city council, and I wouldn't have my job very long if we did that. So we're always going to have our core mission of serving low income, the very vulnerable populations that we do serve, homeless and veterans that need the help. But we have begun expanding, and we've done that by purchasing apartments on the open market. Laura Bodie has helped us with connecting us with some of our landlord community in the Section 8 market that have aged. The landlords have aged in place, but they care about the residents that they've served, and they don't want those their apartments to be sold on the open market and have extremely high rents. So we've purchased some apartments. This one, 2120 Oak Street, 9 units. We worked out, we gave some cash up front, and the seller carried back paper, and we're able to keep the rents low. And on turnover of those units, we're planning to serve that missing middle at this development here that's near Cottage Hospital. And Castillo Street, we did that with another local landlord. Same thing, a similar price range. And it's with the seller carryback financing at the price that we purchased it. We're able to keep the rents low for the existing tenants there so they don't lose their housing. And on turnover, we can serve that income range of the little bit higher income that need help as well, earners. So more housing is needed. You've heard it all tonight. So how do we get there? So we need to increase the housing supply, and we do that by creating multifamily housing developments downtown with bonus density and getting creative. Now, the Housing Authority has, as I mentioned, we're active developers. We're developing an 89-unit Frail Senior development on Hope Avenue. We're developing a 17-unit veterans moving from homelessness by the high school. And we just purchased a 200 North La Cumbra, 1.3 acres that we plan to develop with affordable housing that will be hopefully accessing the low-income housing tax credit program. But that funding stream is available for low income, for deep targeting low-income individuals. There's not a lot of funding out there for that missing middle. Even when you take out the land component, you still need funding to develop the missing middle housing, and you need to be able to support that with loans and whatever on a permanent basis. So it's a real difficult nut for us to crack, but we're trying that, and we said, hey, let's look at city parking lots, surface parking lots, and how we can look at utilizing that wasted airspace, right? It's wasted. Let's do something good for our community. So we took that to City Council a couple of months ago now, and we got their blessing to at least take a look and see what we could do as a prototype. And we looked at a number of different lots along the Central Business District corridor, and we felt the best site for us to try as a prototype is just outside the Central Business District corridor at the Carrillo Castillo commuter lot. You might have heard about that lot. That's where we wanted to do the tiny home development that I still think we could have done a fantastic job if we had the appropriate funding and provided much needed housing for those that don't have homes. But we said, hey, we can't do that. Let's look at the missing middle here. Let's see what we can do. So we're looking at that site now and putting together some pro formas and doing some studies. We're turning over every stone as far as grant applications and what type of funding streams there are at the federal level and state level. There's not a lot out there for the missing middle. But we're doing our studies now, and we're going to come back to the city to report back on what's possible and what's not, and what kind of gaps there are on that. And just looking at if we did like a 59-unit development there, mix of studios, 1-bedrooms, and 2-bedroom townhomes, we're looking at a cost of about $17 million to do that, and yet the land is free. The land's there, but we still have that cost. We have to figure out where we could do. We figure with keeping the rents low, we can fund a permanent loan of about $9 million, but then we have that gap, of multi-million-dollar gap that we have to look at. So it's just, we have to get creative and look at doing that. We have to look at not requiring, if we build units here, we're gonna say no parking. We're gonna say we're gonna do preferences for those that that work in the downtown area that agree not to own a vehicle. We've done that successfully at other developments here in Santa Barbara. Grace Village, right on State Street, 58 senior units, there's 16 parking spaces. None of the residents own a vehicle. We've shown that we don't need vehicles, and as Matt mentioned, millennials don't need vehicles. They're willing to give up their vehicles as long as there's other multimodal points of transportation that they can access. So that's what we need to look at. We need to be creative. We need to look at tiny homes, manufactured homes that can be done right and done correctly, and create a living environment that works for people. So that's all I have. I did want to mention another event that we're planning for October, and that's October 19th is Housing Santa Barbara Day. We held our first Housing Santa Barbara Day last October, which is National Housing America Month. And we're going to hold it in De La Guerra Plaza, and we're bringing together all the different housing providers and service providers, and we're going to have tiny homes on display. We're going to have our staff there to help people apply for housing and give them different options. So if if you're available Saturday, October 19th, come on out to De La Guerra Plaza. It should be fun. So that's all I have. Thank you.
So as you can see, Rob is a wealth of information and a lot of enthusiasm dealing with a very intractable problem. And a lot of that has to do with real estate, and it has to do with costs. So with that in mind, if you want to take a moment now to write down any questions, pass them to the center aisle. I'll come pick them up on the center aisle. And while I'm doing that, Christy, do you have a couple announcements? Judy's got some announcements, even better. And by the way, no one spoke about granny flats tonight. I don't know, so if someone wants to hit that on a question, be my guest.
I don't know if everyone noticed he mentioned granny flats when I got up here. Hi, I'm Judy Weisbart, and I'm the Vice President of Community Relations for the Academy. I've been with the organization for 7 years and have watched the process of the hustlers, of the Academy, of where we have come to, and it's been amazing. The creation of the Global Citizens Club came out of literally monthly meetings. We're now quarterly meetings, but monthly meetings that we would have to discuss community. I think the most important part about the Academy is it went from being a think tank to really being an involved community action. And as Ronaldo mentioned in the beginning, we've had many actions, and this being, I must say, one of the best. You guys were amazing. Thank you all. But the way that we do this is we started the Community Citizens, or the Global Citizens Club, to invite community in who really wanted to activate change and who really were involved in community. So one of the things that we did was we made available this kind of a meeting quarterly for you for no cost, but of course it costs us. So I'm here to ask for money because that's what we do. I'm actually here to say that anyone who is giving $300 a year to any approved or affiliated nonprofit in the community is welcome to be a member of this club. And the club actually is quite remarkable. We made an agreement with the El Encanto a few years ago that we would hold them here and actually bring people to the El Encanto. So if you became a member, you would actually get 20% off food at the El Encanto every day of the week. If you are a member, you get 20% off any room or conference room from Monday through Thursday, and you get 20% off spa. So our connection with the community was to give you all goodies that is actually being kept in the community, which is at this wonderful hotel. So we would love for you to do that. We also have started something really interesting. Christy's left, but Christy and Ronaldo have been working for the past year, and it's been live for almost a year, a wonderful radio show called Solutions News, and it's from 5 to 6 on KZBSB, which is 1220, and 1290. I can't read my own writing, 1290. And it plays on Fridays from 5 to 6. This week, who are we having? Jerry Brown, who those of you who've been coming since 7 years ago know Jerry Brown. He's going to be fun. Amazing people have been. I mean,
Not the governor,
oh,
expert on psilocybin.
he's not the,
drugs.
yep, on psych, right. Which is so much more fun. And by the way, Jerry Brown is no longer the governor, so we don't even have to mention him anymore. Anyway, Solutions News is amazing, and you should all tune in. It's also replayed, and it's also podcast, so you can listen to it. It's Ronaldo and his magnificent brain asking amazing questions to people who have magnificent brains, so you actually learn a lot like you do here. All of that being said, we are looking for sponsors for that radio show. We're hoping to take it to San Francisco and LA. We think that what we do here in Santa Barbara is relevant throughout the state, and we want that to be a part of it. So any of you that are interested in becoming a member of the Global Citizens Club, there is an envelope out front. We would love you to become so. Talk to me, talk to Christy. And if you have a business, or you're just an individual with a lot of money, but if you have a business and you really would like to sponsor a radio show that makes change and that is a part of this kind of a conversation, do the same. Come to me or to Christy, and we'd be happy to tell you how to do that. So thank you all. And now hopefully everyone handed in this was just the little part in between so we could hand in all of our cards and requests for questions. And now it's going to go to Ronaldo to start the questions. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
You don't have to just fill out your question. You can actually ask them. It's only if we don't get to your question, then we'll answer them after the fact.
So if you're in this box and you've given us one of those questions, raise your hand, and we're going to call you to take the microphone because everything's being recorded. And then anybody who doesn't get answered, we will go back and we'll answer it later after tonight. So we've had that request before because of the limitations of time. So we've got a good 20 minutes right now. So let's take our first question. And give us your name when you do that, please.
All right. Hi, good evening. My name is Roxana Bonderson. I get to be first. That's exciting. I passed in my card, but I took a picture of it, so I'm just going to read it from here for convenience. I wanted to start by addressing Matt. So I don't know if you remember me. We've done a few meetings together with John. And I just want to say again, I admire and support all of your ideas and your efforts to bring people together and be an advocate yourself, but also empower others to be advocates. I do a lot of those things too, so we should chat later, team up. But as from the point of view of an architectural land use planner, the question I have for you tonight is, I have to look at my card, from a financial and planning and permitting point of view, the ideas that you stated about making kind of the Millennial Center in downtown, which is a wonderful idea and I'm excited about it. My question to you is, you stated that you can bring together all the people to the community events to discuss the millennial housing and basically mobilize all these people. But what do you propose to actually accomplish the wish list that you're discussing in these community events?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there are a lot of possibilities for creative solutions to that. So I'm not actually proposing to have all of the answers, although I do see a lot of possibilities. One of them is that I think there is a lot of opportunity to take advantage of some of the properties on State Street that are really underutilized, specifically the one-floor businesses. There are a lot of one-story businesses that are vacant right now that I see an opportunity with the right team in place of developers and with support from the city to be able to scale those buildings and bring them up to closer to the height limit of the city, and create housing on the second and third floors, and drive business to the first floor. So it would be a development plan for a property owner that saw the opportunity to be part of the solution, the right developer that would have a plan for how that property could be developed to maximize its potential to both bring housing and drive business to the first floor. Because I see that there are a lot of properties on State Street, these one-floor businesses. Not only are they hurting the community by being vacant, but they're not bringing anyone else there that can then go to the other businesses next door. So if you created a 3-floor building that had second and third floor housing, smaller micro units, studios, maybe 1-bedrooms that are smaller, that had the amenities that they needed but gave up some of that extra square footage, you could create a scenario where you were bringing dozens of new residents to that building, driving traffic to the first floor business, and then those residents would become patrons of all those neighboring businesses. They would bring their friends downtown. They would invite friends in from out of town that could stay with them. I mean, it would have a ripple effect in a lot of different ways. So I think that's just one example of an opportunity that I see. And like I said, we don't need 10 of these properties to go in at once. If one property owner said this sounded like a good idea and the right team came in together and the city supported pushing that property through the coding and everything that needs to take place, because I see that as obviously a big deterrent for a property owner, is it takes so long to develop properties in the city. Not only do they have to come out of pocket to develop, but the lifespan of that development, it gets dragged out so long that it's very discouraging for the developers and the property owners. So like I said, it's a team game, but that's one example of something I see could be a real catalyst.
Do any of the panelists want to comment on that question? Rob or Jason? Yeah.
But first I want to introduce Council Member Kristen Snedden, are you still here? I'm not sure if you got introduced at the beginning.
She did.
And Megan Harmon.
Yep.
And then Planning Commissioner Michael Jordan, did he get introduced?
No, we didn't. Michael.
And Deborah Schwartz. I know you mentioned John Campanella, and these are these the only three from the Planning Commission here? These are three of the hardest working civil servants, because Planning Commission deals with all the land use functions that the city has, and we send them more work and they get appealed. It's a lot of work, and they do great work. And I talked to Matt a little bit before we started, so I'm going to tease him a little bit. We both have in common, we founded nonprofits that help here in the community, but I want to tease him because it sounded a little bit like millennial splaining when you were talking. And what I worry about is, I think you're absolutely right about these housing developments, but what I'm afraid is you're not going to be in there because my mom's going to show up with her checkbook first, and all the seniors are going to come in because everything you offer, these amenities, are exactly what everyone wants. And do you remember the Honda Element? It was like this SUV that was had these reversible doors, and you could hose it out. It had like rubber, and they designed it for young people with active lifestyles. Well, it turned out to not sell to those people, but seniors bought these things up in record numbers. And that's the problem with trying to predict supply and demand. But I think this is going to be a great product, but I worry that millennials might not be able to afford it because it's going to come in at a high price point. CBDs, central business districts, cost about 60% more to develop than outside of the CBDs. And either way, it'll be a great thing, and I'm 100% behind it. In fact, Councilmember Sneddon and I voted for this last February, a year ago February. And we weren't able to get a majority of the votes to push it through in an expedited fashion, but it'll come back around, and hopefully we can push it forward.
And just for those
That's
who don't,
why we need the yes and people, not the but no people.
Exactly.
and for those who don't know, the people often quote the limitation on height. Matt referred to it as 2-3 stories. We can actually go to 5 stories in this town if there's a public purpose for it. It was recently approved by the city council in conjunction with a property that is being developed for long-term care of the challenged.
Sanctuary centers.
Sanctuary Centers was the name of the project. I didn't know if I guess everybody knows that. Okay, so you can go to 5. Yeah, so you can go to 5 stories, and when you start putting 5 stories, which is 4 more above retail, you start to get some affordability numbers that look a little better. You also would get that if the land were free, as Rob referred to, not just in the one parking lot he's talking about, but in others. An idea that the Academy came up with was, why not take one of the most popular parking lots, say Figueroa, add a second story of parking and 3 more stories on top of that of housing. And that second story of parking will generate extra revenue for the city. The lease then could be free for 99 years on the top 3 floors. And if anybody wants to talk about why that would work, I think the numbers pencil. So anybody on the panel want to talk about that as a way to deal with what Matt's suggesting, which is, can we go up with what we've got already? Rob or?
I don't have specifics on it. I just know that with construction costs the way they are, with traditional construction costs of materials, and it's costing us on the 251 South Hope development $326,000 per unit there, and the reason why we're down at that level per unit is because it's so many units, 89 units. The 17 units is costing us over $600,000 per unit to build, and it makes your head spin, right? We need to do something different in order to get the cost down, and I'm concerned about doing the State Street type of development of looking at the single story structure and going up above there. There's a lot of engineering that's going to be required, and the cost there is, I'm just trying to think to myself, how do we make that pay? I would love it. It's definitely needed. We need that mixed use. We need to make State Street our living room. But how we pay for it is, if I had that silver bullet we talked about earlier, we'd already be doing it.
Appreciate you had something. I think you were about to say something. You want to add?
I was not, but I can join in.
Okay.
So I think going to 5 stories, you're going to have some controversy in the city of Santa Barbara, going back to historic roots. And also when it comes to engineering, we have to consider the civic side and the pressures of the resources. So an additional water. I would say taking vacant properties in terms of like vacant commercial in downtown State Street would be viable. The building that will be used for Amazon right now, it initially was going to go towards housing once Saks sold it. However, they chose not to go for housing because it was not viable because of parking constraints. So I think policy in terms of just being relevant to district specific would increase viability for making mixed use in downtown State Street.
Although, as Rob pointed out, parking is less of an issue if you plan it right, and that's, I think, Matt was saying as well. So there's some vestigial beliefs we have about what can and can't work, and what I'd hope all of you would do is be as creative as you can with what you think might work. Next question.
Okay, my name is Brad Smith. My question is for the policy people. If we can make policies like AUD that, as Rob pointed out, drive land costs up, why can't we make policies that drive land costs down?
I'm happy to take a stab at that. We just did. Yeah. 2 weeks ago on Tuesday, we had a 7-0 vote, and I want to thank Kristen Sneddon and my colleagues. We put in a policy for 10% inclusionary housing. And this is something that I worked on. Kristen wasn't yet on council, nor Megan. 3.5 years ago, I put it on the agenda with Bendy White, and it took a while to get through the system. It takes a long time, and we were stuck between 15 and 10%. It landed at 10%. You need 5 votes on something like this, and we had 4 for 10, but we ended up with, or 4 for 15, but ended up at 10, because you're exactly right. This will drive the price back down, because anytime you encumber land, the price drops. When you free it up, when you take away any restrictions from land, the price goes up. So that's unfortunately one of the unintended consequences of the AUD. The other unintended consequences of AUD is it also drove up labor costs. And the city was overwhelmed with permitting applications, which kind of slowed down an already not optimal situation, not only for housing, but also for commercial. You've heard problems and people complaining about not being able to get restaurants through the system. So that's my answer to that.
Next question. Right here. Oh, there. Thank you.
Hi, good evening.
Your
Thank
name?
you all for coming here. The amount of information at this panel is incredible. My name is Amy Baird. I'm a local. Am I echoing?
No.
Okay. And I love Santa Barbara. My family personally took in a homeless person and put him up on our 3.5 acres in his own house, which was kind of a tiny house, and hosted him for 10 years. Not everyone has, number one, the maybe trust to do so, right? Taking somebody who's off the streets, or the resources to be able to support that, whether it's food, home, etc. But I think this is a bigger picture comment that I'm going to make, is listening and going to all of the economic forecasts over the decades in Santa Barbara, is understanding that this problem may become much bigger. I mean, if we look at what people like Andrew Yang are talking about with things being more automated and jobs actually going away. Santa Barbara, I think, is a great space because it is expensive to live here, that we have necessity as the mother of all invention. People become much more brilliant at how they do make things work. And what I'd love to hear from Jason, and I'd love to connect all of you with different people as well, Jason with a couple of lenders. Carpinteria has done a great thing with giving people $75,000 for their down payments. It was a grant the state did. Santa Barbara did something similar to give people money, because the down payment is the hardest part to come up with. And at $75,000, you pay off after you pay off your loan after 30 years. That was a huge benefit. I don't know how many of the funds are still available, but those sort of programs really do help. And I love Lucreza's idea that it is a solution, and that is the optimism that we have to go with. And the millennial question I have for you, Matt, is what do you think the vibe really will be, and how do you feel that if there are more small mini houses, which I do feel like people that are downsizing. I'm a real estate broker, so I see people that, trade up, trade down. They want to retire. They want to get into something. They don't want to have to mow the lawn. That this really is becoming much more of a sought after item, like you mentioned. That like you mentioned with the cars, right? You don't know who's going to go after it. What do you feel about if it is a millennial? Is there going to be more of a commitment? Because I feel like sometimes we have these fears that are maybe preconceived but not real as to will they be more of a transient vibe? Will alcohol become more of a problem with the younger generation being in a downtown area? And I hear that from some of my colleagues and some of my clients that I feel like they need a little bit more education of hearing like what that looks like on a, is it a year-to-year lease? How do people feel like they give a commitment so that they're committing to the community as well and preventing more transiency than we already have? Because obviously that's what we're trying to get past. And again, thank you all because you're doing amazing work.
So I bought a home right out of grad school when I was 28 using a city silent second. The home was $100,000, so we were dealing with a different world back then. But it's absolutely something that I've been pushing. Oxnard does it. It's just simply amazing that Santa Barbara's not doing that. And Ronaldo had asked earlier, how do we incentivize home ownership? Well, we've de-incentivized it. The AUD made density for apartments 67. Is that the highest? I'm drawing a blank here. Where are my planning commissioners? 65 per acre?
63.
And for condos, it's 33. So it's more, almost double for apartments. So if you're a developer trying to squeeze more units on a plot of land, you're going to build apartments rather than condos and townhomes. There's other problems with condos and townhomes legally and financially, but when you double the density for apartments, that's what you're going to get. It's not even close in terms of how it pencils out. And the thing is with condos, even if they do develop condos and they're owned by an individual, they ultimately, a lot of them turn into rentals anyways. So that's something to keep in mind. They do serve that dual purpose, and they're built at a higher standard. They have a little more storage. They're more livable than the specs for apartments. So that's something that I've sought, and hopefully we can achieve.
And to touch on your question about the transiency, I think there's a couple ways you could deal with that. One would be to, I know this is something other cities do in these developments, is you could have more of a flexible lease. So you maybe do a 6-month lease at a higher premium, and then you can pay less if you do the full year. So there's one way to do that is be a little bit flexible there. And I think what you'll notice is if we get enough feedback from the city, which is why we're doing this event in a couple months, is bring millennials out to start to get feedback from people in the community of what their needs are. So we have some raw local data to go off of. I think what you'll see is there's plenty of people looking for this type of housing where if someone were to come in and then decide to move, you won't necessarily have trouble renting that place again. So full occupancy, I think, is something that with the right data, developers can feel comfortable that they're going to have full occupancy, even if people maybe aren't staying as long as a typical household. Another way to deal with that would be relationships with some of the businesses. So, I mean, I'm sure Amazon, Sonos, Procore as examples, they're wanting their employees to be sustainable and be able to stay at their company long term and not feel like a year in they can't afford to live here, so they quit. So there's a way to align with the business owners around this too, where you could create relationships with an owner of a business that says, hey, listen, I'll take 10 units and make sure that if one of my employees leaves, I'll fill it with one of my new employees that I'm moving to town. So I think there's a way to create strategic relationships to help maintain occupancy as well. So there's just a couple suggestions that I've seen working in some of the other cities that I go to.
And yet, to that point, what Rob and I were talking earlier tonight about the fact that we don't have an organized conversation going with the tech companies that want to bring more people into town. And that's time for that conversation because they're coming. So we better decide how we want to handle that. Next question, back here. Yes, ma'am. Over here, actually. Over here first, then you're next.
Thank you. My question actually falls right on those heels, so perfect timing. Yeah, my name is Matthew Lowe, and we just started a program called Neighbor Match, which is like Match.com for housing, so it'll be a little fun. But my question is following kind of on that corporate responsibility aspect. Lucrecia's presentation made me think about the socio-equity aspect of how we really address the housing and the corporate responsibility. So the question kind of turns to policy, obviously, but the input of how do we create socio-equity within our community is very vital. And the AMI and then also the low income, and how do we balance that? So the question is how do we start the conversation around a corporate social responsibility tax for those like Amazon that are coming in here, or the bigger corporations that maybe should have a little bit more accountability or responsibility for housing in our communities. The bigger ones like the Appfolio and Yardi and Procore, and so what would that conversation look like to get started, and to maybe have them be a little bit more accountable? Because I'm seeing the end being this program that Rob Fredericks is talking about, of this gap. He can make $9 million, but he needs to make $8 million more to make this project feasible. And the corporate social responsibility seems to be a really viable way to meet that socio-equity that Lucrecia was talking about. So I guess input from you all would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. So I think a great case study to begin this with is right when I was transitioning from a position in Seattle, Washington, it was right when Google and Amazon was going into Seattle. So while I was focusing on transitional homes and shelters, and I think it's important that we remember that we're at the highest amount of homelessness in history. We also had Amazon and Google coming into Seattle, and that increased homelessness. 60% or more were employed full-time. At the same time, I was transitioning into a consultation position for the vacant properties, and my primary location at the time was Austin, Texas. So this is right when Amazon is going into Austin, Texas. Amazon's going into Google, into Seattle. Amazon's going into Austin. The big difference when it came to how it affected was a housing tax. So when Google came into Seattle, there was not a tax, but when Amazon went into Austin, there was quite a tax that they were able to expand on freeways. They're able to take plots of land. They use that as a city to be able to invest in people that might not be able to afford to live there otherwise. In addition to that is policy mandates. So people are able to see trends, they buy real estate, and if there's not a policy to protect those current tenants, then they can jack up the rent prices from 100 to 200% or more, and then give them 30 days to 90 days move out. Santa Barbara is 60 days. So if we're bringing more employees into Santa Barbara, we need to make sure that we, one, protect rental rights, and two, be able to make sure that there is a tax on employees, as well as employee incentive housing. So that means that if you are applying for a rental in the city of Santa Barbara, that you have priority over someone who is commuting from outside of Santa Barbara.
If I can take a stab as a policymaker, it's difficult to do it city by city. This is really something that Sacramento should be doing. If we do it, Amazon will just go to Goleta or Carp or unincorporated. So they venue shop. You've seen this when Amazon was building their second headquarters. It was this feeding frenzy of who can give Amazon the most money. And AOC said, hell no, you're not coming to New York. She made it a real social justice issue of starvation wages and got into a fight with Jeff Bezos. So the devil's in the details, but those details need to be sorted out in Sacramento or DC. And I initiated my conversation tonight by saying it really is nationwide policy, and we need to have policymakers who are free from the shackles of whoever can pay them the most money in terms of lobbyists. So special interests need to give way to just thoughtful policy that benefits the maximum number of people and is long-term economic thinking for Americans.
So we're going to take one more question officially, which is yours. And if you want to stick around after this, we said we'd get you at around 7:15, and we're about 5 minutes over. So after this question, anybody wants to leave, please feel free to do so. We don't want you to feel captive. But I think the panel will stick around a little bit longer so we can keep going. Please.
Hi, I'm Laura Bobie. I'm head of the Santa Barbara Rental Property Association, which has about 100,000 rental units in Central California, 1,000 owners. Most of them own 1 or 2 units. They're small owners, generally 60 or older, that bought when they were back here as hippies surfing. They invested. They're currently selling their properties because they're concerned about the new restrictions on housing here. So we've got outside investors coming in and buying up these units, which of course is going to jack up the rents. And then what I see that concerns me is I know the millennial housing stock, and we've got developers that have done it like Mesa Lane very well here. I'd love to see it. It's hot. It's what my girls live in. However, if you look at a city like Seattle, that is millennial-based housing. Same with San Francisco. The difference is our economy is hospitality-based, so they're primarily low-income earners that are earning minimum wage, and now they'll be competing against people working for Amazon as professionals for our very small housing stock. So again, that's going to jack up the rents for our locals. So how do we serve the locals? Rob's done a phenomenal job of creating low-income housing, and we've got about twice the national average, extremely high quality. We're a model for the rest of the country. So my question has been, why can't we do the same for that missing middle? Because we've got the brains and intelligence here. We have people like Jason, and we've got the policymakers that are on a planning commission that really could be creating that missing middle housing. But you've got to be innovative. You have to think of new financial models, like doing co-op housing, where people can buy in. That's not on the West Coast now. So you've got to involve like Montecito Bank, get them educated about how they can do it. Get the foundations like Santa Barbara Foundation that are sitting on huge pots of money and say, look, you could help the housing crisis by providing low-income co-op loans. Like the only co-ops that exist in this area are in Isla Vista, and they exist because they got low-income loans for people to buy into co-ops. So that allows a huge community to purchase at a lower equity rate. And then when you look at the successes you were talking about, what's the only success we have had in this country in creating more missing middle housing? There's only one model that's worked, and I've studied this for 5 years because housing is my passion and Santa Barbara is my passion. And I don't want to lose what's really special in this community. It upsets me terribly to see all these outside investors coming in and us losing our community. So we create innovative models here. That's what we can do that nobody else does. And the one way I've seen it work, the only way I've seen it work, is if you have exactly what the gentleman over there was talking about and what Matt was talking about, you have employer-sponsored housing. I'm on the board of the Coastal Housing Partnership, which represents all the employers, about 20,000 employees here in this area, and they're looking for housing for their employees. That's why they created this nonprofit. So what I'm wondering is, why are they not paying and helping subsidize bringing these employees in? Particularly when the city is allowing all these new hotels to come in with people that are earning minimum wage. You know, with the new hotel, will remain nameless, but down in Montecito, they've had a turnover rate of over 100% already because the staff can't afford to live here. And they're commuting an hour and a half each way to be dropped off at the fairgrounds and then take a bus from there down to the hotel. So why, when we're allowing those developers to come in, aren't we requiring that they do something to provide housing for all those employees that otherwise can't? So I want to say I really support the idea of dunning the corporations. Get them, Amazon has taken the lead in doing things like that, Google has as well. Get them contributing, get Rob to help build and develop the property, and then we have a solution. Okay.
Thank you for those comments. The one thing I would say that kind of touches on that and some of the other comments is what's the purpose, what's the objective? And Rod Fredericks, who we really appreciate your 24 years service. I think we need to explain to the millennials what that means with the gig economy. You said we're not providing the housing for millennials, where more housing is needed, and I think you're speaking within the affordable housing world, because we don't just want to build housing. If we're going to build housing in Santa Barbara because we're fairly built out, it has to be purpose-built. It has to be environmentally friendly, it has to be affordable, and it has to be matching our architectural style, our Santa Barbara style. So we aren't, our goal, our mission at Santa Barbara isn't to provide the housing stock for California. You know, Governor Newsom's talking about, what is he saying, 350,000 units a year? We're not gonna get those into Santa Barbara. We wanna do replacement housing for our housing that's here, and help find housing for people who grew up here who suffer catastrophes, and Housing Authority is doing an amazing job with that, like Laura said, twice the national average. And that's really where we want to focus. So it's a tough job to balance providing those special needs housings and keeping our charm. We have a real challenge ahead with our housing stock that we do have that's becoming aged very quickly, and getting the permits to repair it. You know, short-term rentals is something we battled with, and we had to limit them in order to preserve housing stock for long-term rentals for our residents, our workers. One of the things I talked about was, can we get a permit to help people repair their homes? Because a lot of our longtime residents have homes that are now needing permits to be fixed, and it takes so long to get through the system, and it's so expensive, they're having trouble fixing their homes. I've spent about 8 hours this week helping someone in a mobile home whose water heater broke down, and they actually have to go through the state to get their permit. And they said, we should get it to you by Labor Day. And I said, this 91-year-old man is not going to wait until Labor Day to have his hot shower. So I got the senator's office involved, the assemblywoman, and I think we finally got a solution today. But these are the kinds of problems that government creates that we need to really work on cutting red tape, streamlining solutions, because a lot of the affordability, particularly if we want to build a lot downtown, which it sounds like everyone's in agreement on, is we've got to reduce the red tape to the bare minimum, to the health and safety and artistic code. So that's my 2 cents.
Before anybody leaves, and if you want, you're welcome to do so. We're going to stick around if you want to stay. There was an article on July 6th called Satisfying the Ache for Home, which was published as part of Optimus Daily. For all of you who don't know, we provide a free service the Academy does called Optimus Daily, which is 5 optimistic solutions about something happening in the world you didn't know about. So don't deal with just the questions and the problems, deal with the solutions. It's totally free. Comes to you 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And you can read it in about 2 minutes. So urge you all to take a free subscription if you're interested in Optimus Daily. Take a look at it. It's optimusdaily.com is where they sign up, right? Great. Okay, so the next question, please. Back here. Oh, wait. Okay, well, next one.
Hi, my name is Brian Hollander. I'm the program manager for Independent Living Resource Center, and I just wanted to express a concern that I haven't heard a lot of conversation about accessibility or universal design in our conversations about housing solutions, and especially for this community, I think it's something that's really important. The average age of a Santa Barbaran is 60 years old. We have an aging population. In addition to that, we have a considerable amount of people here who have disabilities, and we need to think about that in all of our planning. And so I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
Thank you. Any comment?
For Brian, I will say that all of our developments, we look at accessibility and universal design in our new developments so it works for everyone.
And I can expand on that. I actually do some work for Rob. So ADA, or accessibility, is if you're doing affordable housing, you can get what's considered a TCAC. You can get a tax credit reimbursement if a percentage meets the accessibility requirements, which incentivizes developers to be specific towards that need. So we are moving towards that. Earlier, I talked briefly about the additional program with LEAD, so expanding on sustainability. Socioequity includes the emphasis of accessibility and mental health.
As the old guy in the panel, I've really pushed towards creating architecture that works. That's why I've talked about making sure our downtown has housing for seniors. I think there's a real strong opportunity around the Granada and the Arlington where you have a very strong arts district and you don't have a vibrant nightlife scene, which might conflict with housing, to have senior-built housing there, because that increases the accessibility because you can walk or get places more conveniently. I'd love to see Santa Barbara shoot for a system where every 10 blocks is a little microgrid where you have everything you need, groceries, services, housing, and when we had the new zoning plan, I was the only one who voted to allow little mini markets in our R1 districts, and so that would be something that would allow people out in the suburbs, as much as they're suburbs, to be able to walk places and get basic needs met. So hopefully that comes back. We've adopted a Vision Zero, which is pedestrian and bike-friendly traffic, because we want people to be able to walk places. And we had missed an opportunity with Mitchell Terrena. That was going to be part of our bike master plan. And that was an area where I was hoping we were initially going to eliminate the parking on Mitchell Terrena to make up room for a bike path, and it was strongly protested by the community who wanted to park there. And my suggestion was, let's make a plan for 5 or 10 years out where we will do that, and we allow the tenants time because there's natural turnover, but to make that a sharing community where we can put in a tool shed where people can share tools, a little micro library, put a little farmer's market on Mitchell Terrena to really create spaces in Santa Barbara that are innovative. And then slowly that would spread around. But we eventually need to ditch the car model that we have. It's going to happen, I think, with automated cars and Uber. You won't need to own your own car. You'll be able to if you want. I'm not trying to take anyone's car away. But it'll be so much cheaper just to jump in an automated car that's driving around, which is why I think Rob is hesitant to build more parking lot based housing units, because at some point, whether it's 10, 15, or 20 years, we're not going to need all these parking spaces.
Although you say that in the city where we don't even allow scooters yet, just to put it in perspective. So we've got to look at that. Okay, so over here, yeah. Back here, there's a lady back here. She's been waving.
Thank you. I want to ask 2 really quick questions. Okay, list close. Okay, just like potential, policy fixes for some of the things that we've talked about today. The first is, where is Santa Barbara in terms of considering getting rid of parking minimums? I think we've kind of seen that take place in cities all around the world, and without getting into like the policy background, it's really just about, if we have limited land and we're not doing enough to house people, why would we use it to house cars? And then my second question is related to the tiny homes project. I was a really big fan of that. What could we do to bring that back to our city? I think there were a lot of people who at large liked the concept and maybe got caught up in the details, but what could we do to bring that back as a funding solution that was on our ballot as a sales tax? Thanks.
Jason, do you want to start with that?
So I agree with the parking, particularly downtown, because we have nighttime parking that's not used. All those lots that were shown are not used at night. And so residents could park their cars there at night, and then when they leave in the daytime, if they have to have a car and they're driving to Goleta or Ventura for work, they can take the car to the parking lot or pay a little extra to leave it there, because there is capacity in most of the lots. Ideally, we make some of this housing and require you not to own a car. You sign a lease agreement that say you're going to not have a car. So that will obviously be challenged by some people who want to live there and will park their car 3 blocks away. But there are ways where I think with state legislation, we can fix this problem. And in terms of, what was the second half of the question?
All right, the first half was actually about parking minimums, where you changed the planning codes. That way developers are not required to build.
Right. That's what I'm saying, no parking minimum downtown. So someone can build a building with no parking. So that would be a 0 minimum.
Okay, but it doesn't preclude necessarily owning parking, just the aspect that you have to like build it into the development itself.
Yeah, so 0 minimum would be 0. And then the second half of the questions I heard it was, what about the tiny houses and the possibility of getting some tax-based support for it, is what I heard. Right. Rob?
I'm still licking my wounds from the tiny homes, but I am a true believer that it could work, and at the appropriate site, either tiny homes or micro homes, we need to do it more affordably, and that's a way to provide homes. If we can provide units at $30,000 to $60,000 per unit, that's a whole lot better than what I was telling you earlier at $360,000 a unit. But we need to have that conversation with the city folks and our elected officials and planners, and do it in the right manner and involve the community. We need community will and public support when we bring these ideas forward. We need the YIMBYs at the table with us.
We've got one question over here.
Rod, John Campanella, thank you for all you do. And all
John, thanks for coming. We acknowledged you earlier.
Okay, and thank you all for being here. Just a question for you. We've spoke about this in the past, but looking at possible solutions for your issues with land costs and no land costs not being able to build, are you ready to actively look at partnering with for-profit developers? In other words, where they can help mitigate the costs. And what you bring to the table is what really it doesn't exist in this city, and that's certainty. Do I feel I can get my project approved on a timely basis and according to the rules that are in place now before they have to be changed? So I think that certainty is big. You're talking about density bonus. With you involved doing affordable, that density bonus can become a reality under state law. So I think by partnering, you bring something to the table. A developer can do higher market that can subsidize your product. So the question becomes imploring to, I think, start looking at that opportunity if we're trying to get something downtown.
And let me just dovetail. So there's a question that came up half an hour ago. You might connect the two. Is there a way to bring in some of the corporate interests, which now want housing, together with what John's suggesting might be a different approach of private-public partnership? Go ahead.
Absolutely, there are, and People Self-Help Housing developed a model. They presented at the Housing Task Force 2 years ago for their employer-sponsored housing model, and they rolled it out in San Luis Obispo. Unfortunately, they didn't get the employers that said they would be willing to join in when they were ready. But I really think that we do need to have the conversation with the Procores and Sonos and Amazon and get them at the table to see what they could do to participate in making some of these needed developments a reality. I mean, I heard earlier that Amazon's bringing in 300 employees. Where are we going to house 300 more people?
By the way, John, I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, Rob and I were talking before we started on that very subject. And how to get that conversation started, I think, is a great question. But what I heard Rob say that he's open to it, so we get the conversation. Yeah.
If you can answer private developers, not necessarily private.
Sure. Okay. Yes. Yeah, we're all for it. We need development. If we can't do it alone, if we need to partner with private developers, let's do it. Yeah.
And I agree. And there's pathways to make it to create more incentives for private developers. I think the tiny homes question, to bring that back, I think that's something that's probably more conducive to private development, because with tax credits, whatever agency is approving that is going to want to see more bang for their buck than tiny homes provide. The problem with tiny homes is they're not very environmental. You're wasting a lot of space. You create a lot of unusable spaces between the homes. You're much better off having one building with several apartments in it for the same bang for your buck. So I think that would be a problem with tax credits. But I'm all for tax credits and using that to produce the type of housing that's purpose-built.
Okay, one more? No, this lady right here.
Hi, Linda Honigman. I'm really happy we had younger voices. That's super important. And I've been really kind of alarmed that we're losing. It's the age group 25 to 44. So we have more people coming to college, and then they can't afford to stay. So I personally would rather not live in a community that just gets older. And I was really happy to hear Laura talking about cooperatives. There are a number of people, like the student housing co-op people, that are wanting to do something downtown. Number of people that I'm anxious to get together with Matt and others. But my question to Jason is, can we somehow access the developers that are currently in the AUD pipeline that might not complete their projects, put them together with millennials or whoever that have some affordable options, that you could have 20% more, you could have 20% low income, which is up to the $56,000 income that the younger workforce certainly would qualify for. And it just seems like there are a lot of win-wins there, if we can somehow access people that have that property.
That's a great idea. And there are ways too with land trusts where you hold the land in a trust, and so the tenant or the owner's only paying for the building. There's a lot of flexibility there, and it's just The limit is our creativity. Another thing we haven't talked about today is co-ops. And there are a couple co-ops in my district, and I'd love to see more because, again, that allows for virtual home ownership and the stability of home ownership without the high cost in Santa Barbara. So I'd love to see the city and all of you work to promote more co-op properties in Santa Barbara.
Well, there are lots of people that are interested in that, so.
Yeah, and I think Laura brought that up, didn't you, Laura, as well?
Yep.
And the idea of getting Montecito Bank, for example, would be a natural supporter of that kind of thing, because if one bank that size, regional bank, decides to support the lending against a co-op, then it becomes possible. One of the issues is definitely going to be finance as well. Okay, we're going to take one more and then mill around if you want with the panelists for as long as they'll tolerate it, but we'll take one more question from the floor because we're half an hour over now. Does anybody have one more they want to do before we close this off? Here we go, this gentleman. Oh.
Hi, my name is Gabe Escobedo, and I have a question for Councilmember Dominguez. You spoke a lot about housing, getting for sale properties, and how we've kind of prioritized AUDs over for sale projects. And you also talked about we're not going to provide housing for California, but we also haven't built rental housing for decades now. So how do we do both? Because the two are not mutually exclusive. So how do we build rental housing for those that live here, housing and are affordable and otherwise? And how do we also provide for sale properties? Because for the Estancia project on Upper State Street, the condo project, there was actually a waiting list for the lottery to get the affordable units. So there's obviously renters in our community that want for sale projects. How do we serve both?
So, and when you talk about building rentals, what group are you aiming at? Because again, I want everyone to get in the habit of putting an adjective before the housing unit they're talking about.
So if we're going to talk about the missing middle, I would consider it 80% to 200%.
And locals only?
And we could talk about locals only, but we also have 300 people coming from outside of the area who are going to be locals whether we like it or not. So we are going to have to serve other people who are going to be housed here.
Right. And that's the tricky part, how you have that balance between what we need to build for certain categories versus just building for out of city, out of state, out of country folks. So I think you do the special needs housing, you have it purpose built. You don't just build market-based rental units. And in terms of when you say rental units haven't been built, there hasn't been units built specifically as rentals for a couple years, but the condos that were built, like I said, a lot of those are turned into rentals. If you go up to Miramonte, a lot of those condos are rentals, and what happens is once a homeowners association, they have rules on what percentage can be rentals, or banks, is it FHA? One of the organizations won't loan to you if over, I think, half of the units, 30%, are rentals. So then what happens is, who buys those? Well, people who don't need loans, which means out-of-state investors buy these condos and then they rent them out. So these condos turn into investments. The money goes out of city, which impacts our restaurants and businesses. So we should have restrictions on ownership, or at least try to incentivize through employer-sponsored condos, different ways. But just building apartments and hoping, hope is not a strategy, but we can't just build apartments and expect that they're going to be for the people that you're talking about or that everyone here is talking about. We need to have restrictions, or we need to build them to that purpose. But even building them to the purpose, like I gave the example, the Honda Element, the highest bidder gets them, and the rents just go up to the highest bidder in a capitalist society.
Although no one's brought up rent control here. And as you know, it's a hot topic nationally. We now see some cities who are basically getting tougher on rent control. Others are relaxing it. So it's a very controversial subject, but I'm going to just throw it out for people to be thinking about, not because anything is happening at the city level to do that, but it's another one of the elements in this mix. And there are downsides and upsides to that. So just be aware that these conversations are national as well as regional and local. And I want to thank all of our panelists tonight for coming. You've been really very great. Thank you. Informative. You've been informative and engaging, and we want to thank you for that. And hopefully you've gotten more people thinking and more people engaged tonight. Thanks very much. Thank you, and thank you all for coming.